Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I've had a few people ask me, hey, Brad Schoenfeld said some stuff the other day. It's kind of circulating all through the lifting world. We wish you would talk about it, because you're big on full body training. You promote a lot of people train full body 3 days a week. And I think people need to keep in mind, not all of my programs are written that way, though. So throwing that out there for perspective, I think you guys might find that my intermediate off-season linear periodization program really would be very much in line with what Brad Schoenfeld is saying. But let's kind of jump back to that point. The point being that Brad has inferred that based upon the data, there may not be a benefit to directly training a muscle more than twice a week in terms of hypertrophy. In spite of all this information that we have about muscle protein synthesis and everything else. And he discussed quite a bit about higher volume training, a fair amount of volume being needed per session to stimulate new muscle growth. And what people need to understand, a lot of that I think is going to apply for people who have a little bit more experience in the gym. Because we know from countless programs run, countless studies done, novice lifters do really, really, really well on full body 3 days a week. And even more advanced lifters can still progress well on it. And I think the debate we get into is that necessarily the best approach for them? Particularly when we're talking about hypertrophy versus strength. Because again, the Mad Cow's 5x5 was full body 3 days a week, and it was run for decades as a very, very successful football program, which is what it was originally intended for. So I think the point that we should think about with some of this is, look, when people are novices, this may not apply because the 3 day a week full body, it works extremely well for the novice athlete. And we know that in certain environments, at least like with the Norwegian study, there's reason to believe ultra high frequency training has its place for those powerlifters. Same thing when it comes to different strength athletes like the Bulgarian training and everything else. A lot of us have used Bulgarian training. It works very, very well. But when we're coming to the topic of overall hypertrophy, and you know what? Maximizing hypertrophy can be part of maximizing strength. When we're talking about people who aren't on drugs or people who use very modest amounts of drugs, basically naturals or almost naturals, not really almost. I mean, if you're using gear, you're not really natural. Let's just be honest there. But there's a strong correlation between size and strength. You can't separate the two. So that being said, yeah, maximizing hypertrophy is important even when we're talking about maximizing strength. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. No expert. A bigger muscle is going to be a stronger muscle. If you want to get as strong as possible, you better get as big as possible. No one's going to argue with that in the sports science world. Anyone who knows physiology. So this is important not just for bodybuilders. This is important for everyone who's seeking maximum speed, maximum power, maximum strength. We damn well better understand how to develop maximum hypertrophy, at least in the muscles we need to move, that we need to lift stuff with, that we need to push stuff with, that we need to hit with. We better have them maximally hypertrophy. So this matters to everyone who is pursuing a serious fitness endeavor. So the question becomes, what's going on here? I think what it comes down to is that, yeah, we know weekly volume matters, and you know what? Brad had produced studies that showed that weekly volume was king. And I think the way that we need to look at this, and this is something I've found to be true myself, look how long I went without making any gains when I was doing fairly low volume training. Now, I had different factors in my life that contribute to that. I'm not going to get into all that here. It isn't relevant to the topic. So people who want to know all about my personal life, I'm not going to get into it. Yeah, I had a situation to where for quite a bit of time here on YouTube last year, I was doing low volume training. I didn't make many gains during that time, really a little bit. Not really a lot. I've made a lot more this year, earlier on in the year, I feel like, in terms of hypertrophy in certain places. But I did a fair amount of volume to do that. So I think what we need to consider is like what Dr. Mike Israetel talks about quite a bit of minimum effective volume. And I think that's really the point of some of this when Dr. Brad, is saying, look, you need a higher volume training to gain more muscle. You need it, and this becomes true the more advanced you get. The way I would explain this is that when you look at any adaptation to training in your body, I don't care whether it's muscle size, muscle strength, any performance endeavor, how about marathon running, swinging a golf club, any physical endeavor that you have to exercise and train for, the better you get at it, the more proficient you get, meaning the better you've adapted to training, the harder and the more work you have to put in to improve, right? For example, you all know if we did a certain amount of training for something at a certain threshold, you're going to stop adapting. And if you don't put in more work than you have previously been putting in, you're not going to improve anymore. In fact, you'll reach a threshold to where you have to maintain the amount of work to even keep what you have, whether it's muscle growth, the ability to swing a golf club, the ability to dance, any adaptation to a training response, because that's all training. You know what? If you want to be a better dancer, you have to train for that. That's a form of exercise. That's training stimulus. All of these different skills that we develop and adaptations in the body to our training. The more proficient you get at these things, the more work it takes to get any better. And the same thing starts to hold true when it comes to muscle growth or muscle strength, because you can't really separate the two. They go hand in hand, don't they? They really do. At a certain point, if you're not able to put in more work, you don't adapt. And anyone knows that who's done the same workout for a year straight. If you stop increasing anything, if you come in and let's say you've been bench pressing 3 sets of 10 with 185 pounds, right? And you eventually you do 5 sets of 10 with 185 pounds, and you don't change that over the next year, do you improve anymore? No. It might seem easier, it might get easier, you might get really, really good at doing sets of 10 with 185 to the point to where you probably could grow and get stronger if you added weight to the bar or you added more volume somewhere. But if you don't improve, you don't improve. In other words, you've adapted to that workload. Once you adapt to any workload or training stimulus, that's it. Once your body is fully adapted, it might take a few sessions. Meaning you might do quite a few sessions with 5 sets of 10 with 185 before your body 100% adapts and gains all the muscle, all the strength, whatever it's going to gain from it. It's not going to improve any further. And this holds true when it comes to volume. And what Dr. Mike always says is that there's a lot of evidence that there's a minimum effective volume. And as we get bigger and stronger and more experienced at lifting, the minimum effective volume to stimulate new adaptation goes up. In other words, your body becomes more resistant to changing. In other words, gaining that extra ounce of muscle is a lot harder after 5 years of training than it was during the second year of training. A lot harder. It takes a lot more work. We get diminished returns. And so we reach a threshold to where if we don't increase the volume, once you become relatively advanced, and this is stuff I'm having to learn again the hard way now that I've built back up to being a somewhat advanced lifter again, pretty advanced lifter, that without reaching a certain volume threshold, you just don't improve. And you have to reach that threshold. And the problem we run into when it comes back to the frequency thing is that can you reach that threshold and recover? Because our recovery does not keep pace. In other words, just because we need a certain volume in order to adapt and improve doesn't mean that we recover from it as quickly. And that's the problem we start running into, is balancing recovery with minimum effective volume. And herein lies our situation. At a certain point, this is where I think this starts to become true. What Dr. Brad's talking about, people don't seem to get bigger faster off of maybe training a lift or a muscle group 3 times a week or 4 times a week. When you reach the threshold to where your minimum effective volume won't let you train that muscle again with any significant volume for like 3 days. If the minimum amount of work that you have to do to stimulate new growth takes you 3 or 4 days to recover from, you can't possibly train that muscle with any degree of workload or intensity again soon enough. And so you end up with a situation to where you need to train it again as frequently as you can to keep the muscle protein synthesis elevated, but you might only be able to train that muscle directly with any significant workload a couple times a week. And training it more than that won't let you do the workload. Now, when we look back at historic training programs, that makes sense with mad cows because there's a really light day in there, isn't there? It's full body 3 days a week, but isn't there a light day? You look at that light day and go, you're not working hard. That light day is there just to stimulate a little muscle protein synthesis. It's not going to stimulate any new growth. The workloads are too low. It really only has 2 days that stimulate you. 1 day that stimulates you maximally. One that's just almost an active recovery day, and then another one that's a little lower than the other one. Heavy, medium, light. You know what? When people start getting advanced, if you want to train full body 3 days a week, you have to go to a heavy, medium, light almost, don't you? And I think that kind of goes back to the point of all of this. So I would say for most people, no, this advice isn't true. Novice lifters do amazingly well repeatedly on full body 3 days a week. At a certain threshold, though, unless you're specializing in a muscle group, and you can specialize in a lifter muscle group, but if you do, you're going to have to back everything else down, don't you? In other words, to see continual growth in one muscle training it more than a couple days a week, ideally you're going to have to specialize in it, and everything else will have to fall back so that your body has enough recovery to handle it. So in an unbalanced system, that may not be true, but if you're running a balanced program to where you're training your whole body, what Dr. Brad Schoenfeld is saying very well does seem to be true for a lot of intermediate and almost all advanced lifters, doesn't it? Seems to be the case. And again, maybe that's why so many really, really successful strength athletes, whether they're power lifters, football players, wrestlers, anything else, end up running upper-lower type splits or push-pull type splits to where each basic lifter function is trained twice a week. That very well might be why those programs are so successful. And I did write my intermediate program to follow that pattern. So it's just food for thought. And that's kind of my take on what he's saying. And the point is, it also is very relative to your experience level and your minimum effective volume. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.